Good evening. I am so excited to be here for the DRJC Real Talk with two of our Delaware leaders, Chip Rossi from Bank of America and Tom Horne from JPMorgan Chase. Today, we're going to talk about the progress that we're making as it relates to eradicating systemic change in Delaware, specifically around wealth creation, education reform, criminal justice, health equity, what's taking place in our workplace. We're going to talk about it all within the hour. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions by using the Q&A function on your Zoom. If you will put your questions in that by using that button, we will make sure that we review them during the broadcasting, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. I want to start by just again, you heard me say it, but to talk about why DRJC. I think for us, the Delaware Racial Justice Collaborative had been in place since 2015, and it had been a collaborative of community stakeholders coming together with a very laser focus around eradicating policies and practices that were addressing systemic racism and inequities in the state. But quite honestly, it wasn't until the murder of George Floyd that it really infused what I would consider a whole nother level of fuel that propelled us to where we are today. When people were protesting or wanted change, what we tried to do was to find a place where the DRJC is about the community, for the community, where everyone can get on board, where everyone's talent and voice can help to drive change. And so we tried to make this so that it was as easy to join, as accessible, but also a place where we as Delawareans could come together in one voice, where we could come together collectively around a common vision, where we could come together to leverage our resources, to leverage and amplify the vision that we'd like to see for One Delaware. So today, we're actually going to have some conversations with Chip and Tom from their views and perspectives. And, we were talking a few minutes before we went live that said, they by no means are proclaiming they're experts, but they are leaders, real critical leaders in our state. And so we're just going to jump right in. I'm going to start with you, Chip. Do you want to mind introducing yourself and talk to the audience about who you are and your role in Delaware and anything else you want to share about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Michelle, and thanks to the DRJC for having both Tom and I this evening, and just to share some of our thoughts. And thanks for the work that you're doing in the transparency you're creating for all, a safe place for conversation to occur and for people to become more informed, and hopefully with more education and more information, it will compel people to do more. So thank you for that. And as you mentioned, my name's Chip Rossi, and I have the privilege of representing the 6,000 people that we employ at Bank of America here across the state at Bank of America. And in my role, I serve as the president of Delaware for Bank of America locally, and also have a job that is in our operational risk and compliance area within the company. But locally here in the state of Delaware, with my role, it's really about working with our 6,000 folks to create an environment where they feel great about the work that they're coming in to do every day on behalf of our company, to support not only our clients and our customers, the businesses that we do business with, our shareholders, and more importantly, and why we're here tonight, the community that we have a privilege to be a part of. I'm locally born here in Delaware, born and raised, went to William Penn High School with my friend there, Tom. Although he looks a lot younger than I do, he's a little bit older than I am. So that's a compliment, my friend. But, and I live here with my college sweetheart, my wife, Tracy, and we have two girls, 22 and 20. So I'm excited about this conversation, and thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tom.
Yeah. Well, hello, Michelle, and hi, everyone out in the audience today. I echo Chip's gratitude for the invitation this evening and for all that you are doing with the United Way and with the DRJC to keep this dialogue going, because I believe that that is what will keep the momentum that we so desperately need. And if we're being honest with ourselves, things have slowed down a little bit in the past year. And so we need to keep these conversations going. Yes, I said to Michelle, I'm certainly not an expert on this topic, but I do learn something every time I have one of these conversations, which is why I always say yes. And I certainly always say yes when I get a chance to partner with my longtime friend, Chip. So thanks again for having us. Yes, born in Wilmington, raised in Newcastle, as Chip said, graduated from William Penn High School 1 year before he did, and also graduated from the University of Delaware. I'm a 33-year Delaware banker. I'm on my 10th year with JPMorgan Chase. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer of our credit card business, and I lead customer service for all of the Chase products. And importantly, I also serve as the Delaware market leader and have the privilege of representing our 11,000 employees in the state. A lot of the same things Chip described, I'm very focused on. How do we create an environment in our company where people want to work? We recognize our responsibility as one of the largest employers in the state to be a good and strong corporate citizen. And my opinion is that as one of the largest employers in the state, so too should be our impact as a corporate citizen. And so we're very committed to that. And certainly this is a part of it in furthering this dialogue and, more importantly, the action around justice in the state. So thank you again for the invitation, Michelle. And Chip, it's great to partner with you once again.
And as we said on the onset, right, we're just having a dialogue, so feel free to jump in. You know, both of you are a part of global organizations with global concerns, but you're also business leaders here in Delaware. When you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice within the context of Delaware, what do you think is the biggest opportunity right now for us to advance this effort in our local community? And what do you see as our biggest barrier?
Well, I'll just jump in, Chip. I think first we have to face the fact that we have an existential problem in this company that is the growing economic inequality that was exacerbated greatly by the pandemic. And that's a national problem, obviously, but we're focused on Delaware tonight. And so I think importantly, companies, and we're talking about the corporate community here tonight, have to recognize that everyone should care about that and everyone has a role to play, but we won't make the progress that we need to make, and we certainly won't make it fast enough if corporations aren't playing their part and involved in the solutions. And so we at JPMorgan Chase take that responsibility very, very seriously. And you know, we all have to acknowledge the long-standing structural issues that you talked about, Michelle, whether it's education, opportunity, employment, those kind of things. And individuals can't do it alone. Corporations have to play a part in that. This is probably an answer to many questions we'll get to. I think maybe the biggest barrier we have on this topic is what I would just call the 80-20 rule. Like, you always have 20% of the people doing 80 or more percent of the work on this topic. And it's going to be really hard to move it at the pace we need it to unless we get more people involved, more people, more companies, more people within companies. I think that's the biggest barrier. And you know who the people are and who the companies are, because they're the same ones that they always are. And so I think what we need to do is, and you're doing it through the DRJC as an example, is pull together more collaboratives like this that are going to help us solve problems.
Yeah. And I just to expand a little more, it is about, and I believe it starts with just a belief that something has to change. It starts there, right? And what's important for us to understand is people are on different places on this journey. Everybody's in different places on this journey. You know, the analogy I always use is think about the New York City Marathon, right? The gun goes off for the start. People are running, right? And they're running across the bridge while some people are just getting to the starting line. And on this journey, people are in different places. And I think it's important for all of us to understand that. But as leaders and as corporate leaders, it's important to have discussions in your companies, regardless of the size, because you have a diverse work group, whether it's experiences, color, religion, sexual orientation, it doesn't matter. It's diverse, and people within your organization need a safe space to have conversations. Now, here's the key. You got to be willing to listen and understand. And look, I mean, it's just, that's part of what needs to happen. It's got to start with that. And it's about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable and recognizing you don't have to have all the answers. That's why you're having this discussion. And I think what I would say to you is that the greatest opportunity, and Tom alluded to it, in Delaware, with the size and scale, you can get people to a table. You can get the right people to the table. The key becomes, okay, are we going to have the honest and open conversations, right, that actually have to occur to move things forward and collectively move forward where you amplify that work, where people aren't tugging against one another when you leave the room. People are rowing in the same direction. And what's great is your effort here is amplifying some of that work. And I think that's our biggest opportunity. It's a barrier that we have today.
So I think one of you noted this is that, we got to do more listening as we're doing engagement. And I think one of the things that a lot of corporations did right after the murder of George Floyd was they started looking inward to their own organizations, and they started having more listening sessions. And the research and the data is showing that more organizations may be using their employees' resource groups, maybe throwing the net wider than that. What can you tell me that you did within your organizations around listening? But then can you give us an example of a real actionable item, something concrete that has come from it so far? And maybe that's something that's still on the horizon.
Well, look, I'll give you some examples, and there's probably some similarities within Tom's organization as well. But listening and doing it both inside and out. And so, you go back 15 months ago with the murder of George Floyd and others, and you realize that conversations need to occur. So first of all, just an open mic session with our teammates locally, just to share what they're thinking. And it was emotional and eye-opening, and just the vulnerability that people shared. And I learned so much and realized how much I didn't know. And so that was number one internally. And then it was more around the sustainable side of that, is keeping the conversation going. More recently, we had our Asian Pacific teammates, same type of conversation. We talked to them at a time around what should we do? And they were talking about just the hate crimes. And one of our teammates shared the fact that they're just concerned about their parents going on a walk. I don't think about that. As a white male, I didn't think about that. But I'm hearing this woman speak of this, and you really understand it from that perspective. So, and then externally, we've had many people come on, and you can imagine locally and nationally, but I'll just talk locally. More recently, we had the mayor of Wilmington come in and share his experience. A couple nonprofit leaders come in, share their experiences. Tony Allen came in, spoke about Delaware State University. Logan Herring locally came in to speak about Riverside and the work that's done there. And what it's done is just created more awareness. And with awareness, I think, creates the opportunity for movement, Michelle. So there's some real examples of things that we've done. What I will tell you is through those listening sessions, what we've realized, a real practical example is you learn about the fact that there are a lot of small business owners that are minority owners that need help. They need capital to run their business, right? And so from that standpoint, one of the things we did is we push capital locally to True Access Capital with and Hampton and the team there. And we've done some things broadly nationally. So that's just an example of something practically that we did as a result of some of the feedback and discussions we've heard. So, Tom.
Yeah, I think, Chip, we're all probably hearing, particularly our companies that are similar in a lot of ways, are hearing a lot of the same things. And, you read George Floyd's murder, we're coming up on a year. And I think most companies probably started having conversations, but I challenge people to be honest with themselves. Are you still having those conversations? And I often wondered what those conversations were like a year ago in a company or on a team within a company that didn't already have an inclusive culture. And how like it was uncomfortable to begin with. If you don't have a culture where there is a level of trust and inclusion already, how difficult that must have been. When I came in the next morning, I represent our 11,000 employees of Delaware. I also have a similar number of employees around the world. And so I pulled my leaders in from all locations in the United States and globally, and I had no idea what to say. I just knew that we needed to talk and get the group together, and we did. And Chip, I heard the same exact things that you did that break your heart, like teams crying together. And an executive director on my team in San Antonio, who said he has to wear a reflective jacket when he runs in his own neighborhood for protection or, for awareness that he's jogging in San Antonio, Texas. And we've kept the conversations going, Michelle, and believe it or not, they're called Real Talk as well. We branded it that a year ago. But we've kept them alive. We do them every 2 weeks, and we are still learning from each other. And we change the topics. We have a different person leading it every week, so it's not always the same people. And we've really kept that dialogue going. I'll give you a really eye-opening example for me that I learned in one of these Real Talk sessions. It somehow came up that many of the people that are on my team are customer service representatives who speak to our customers hundreds of thousands of times a day. And it came up in one of these settings how poorly they are sometimes treated when the customer realizes they're Black. And so this shocked me because I asked, well, why haven't you ever brought that to my attention before? And these are my words, but they had just become desensitized to it. And I was oblivious to it. And so they brought it to our attention. We dug into it. Sure enough, there are examples of that kind of behavior from customers. We got rid of the customers. And we put a policy in place that said, not only do you not have to tolerate that kind of treatment, we don't want you to. Bring it to our attention and we will fire that customer. Whether they have $10 in our account or $1 million in our account, we will fire that customer if they treat you that way. And so it's a little bit of walking the talk. Like after, you came in and you had that conversation with your team after George Floyd's murder, everybody was nodding their head. Yeah, I want to do more. But people need to be honest with themselves and companies need to be honest with themselves. Have you? What did you truly do? And are you still doing it? But it was time. It was high time that we had those conversations.
Well,
Michelle,
sorry, go ahead.
I would just say to that point, we call them courageous conversations, but regardless of the size of the company, just having the conversations are just critically important. It'll be uncomfortable initially, and it still is today, but it's okay. But it starts with just having the courage to do it.
Well, this was going to lead earlier to a point you made, but has a connection. So if we need more companies, so take your 80-20 rule, right? You got 20% of the leaders or organizations that's leading the work, and the other 80 still sitting on the sideline or doing minimal. And if we need more people in the camp to move the needle in a big way, how do we get more leaders? How do we change that equation?
I think I doubt that there are a bunch of leaders that just don't want to help. Maybe there are leaders that don't know how to help or for whatever reason haven't taken the initiative. And, there are leaders like Chip and I who are working on and thinking of ways, and Tony Allen as well, is how do we involve the chamber? How do we involve the business roundtable? How do we get other groups of corporate leaders who all care to come together in collaboration, much like you're doing with DRJC, and try to make progress in that capacity? And that's going on nationally as well as locally. And I'll give an example of something that I've personally put my support behind, and our company has in Delaware, and that's around the clean slate legislation and second chance legislation that recently passed out of the Senate and the Delaware legislature. And so we worked with Senator Darius Brown of Wilmington to clean slate, for those who don't know, is a bill for a process that will automate the expungement of low-level crimes that are eligible for expungement today. But most people don't have the money, the time, and certainly the knowledge of the process to get that done. And as a result, it becomes a barrier to employment. It becomes a barrier to housing. It becomes a barrier to schooling. And so it's something that our company decided we wanted to put our muscle and resources behind nationally. And then we did that here locally as well. And so we were proud to support that. And then second chance is simply giving people with criminal backgrounds who have been justice involved with low-level crimes that don't affect their ability to do the job an opportunity to be employed here. And so a year ago, we banned the box, take the box off the application of have you been convicted of a crime. We took it off. And last year, don't quote me on this, but our firm hired something like 3,000 people with criminal backgrounds that we would not have otherwise hired. And so that's an example of something where we did marshal collaboration from other companies in the state of Delaware for support, which I'm sure helped the bill and helped the bill get passed out of the Senate and the House.
And Michelle, I agree with Tom's point. I think the leaders that I've grown to know across the state, they believe in this work, but it does start at the top. It starts there, and I will tell you that it's important to understand just inside of the company how people are feeling about things. So, do you survey your employees to understand how do they honestly feel about their ability to bring their whole self to work every day? What does your representation across, racially diverse groups look like today? And ask yourself honestly, is that representative of the community that, I have to serve? And many of the leaders are doing those things, but I say that because it's across any size of the company, right? Any size, just important to recognize and acknowledge that. And, locally, I think to Tom's point for us, what we realize is, we're thrilled to be a part of this conversation, but it's not just about us, Bank of America, JPMorgan Chase. It's about all the other terrific organizations that make up this great state of Delaware, all stepping up to help move things forward. And, one of the things we've tried to do here locally is push money like Thomas discussed into the local organizations to help address those inequalities. One of the things we've done recently is with Delaware State University, right? Not about us. It's about, hey, look, let's find out where the opportunities are for employment for your student body. And what do you need to do from a curriculum standpoint, right? To develop where those jobs are and prepare people for those jobs. So when they graduate, they go get employed at a company and they can start to change what the trajectory of their family has been like over time. So those are just real examples that together we're trying to drive change.
Yeah. And so if the 80-20, we think we can shift and change. If we think that the majority of people want to change maybe, but just don't know how. We talked about the size, right? And the scalability of Delaware and the ease of bringing people around the table to make change happen. Then from why hasn't more change occurred?
It's, I think there's a couple things. Look, this is my perspective from the standpoint of, I think you go from, I'm going to call it guardrail to guardrail, right? You have you have a view that's here, or the goalpost, and you have a view that's here. And somewhere in between lies what practically can get done. And I think, to your point, that's what needs to happen, is the practical one. It's about being open-minded enough to listen. And then two, it's about taking what you hear and challenging yourself to make progress. The facts and data don't lie, Michelle. The facts and data across anything you look at, whether it's incarceration rates, unemployment rates, wealth rates, it doesn't matter. Affordable housing, home ownership, right? It all skews unfavorably to communities of color. When you have those facts, then you're hard pressed to say we shouldn't be and can't do more. So I think it just starts there and practically moving towards that. And here's what I'd say to you, and it really resonated with me. And we heard our president, who happens to be from our great state, right, say it. And it really clicked with me from the standpoint of, look, not all progress is linear. You take 2 steps forward and you take a step back, things like that. And I've kind of, this is really, these last 15 months for me have really amplified that. But we are always moving forward towards a more perfect union, a more perfect country. We're never going to get there, okay? But we can be better. And it's just acknowledging that and finding those practical things that we can agree on to move forward. So that's where my head is, Michelle. And it won't be easy. It's hard. Sorry, Tom.
Chip, and some of them actually are easy, and some of them are structural and have been around forever, and they're going to be harder to change. And so, but some of the things that Chip described that we're doing, like, we can make change in Wilmington. We can help fuel entrepreneurs of color, female entrepreneurs. We can help revitalize downtown. We can work with Logan and Reach Riverside on the east side. Like, we can do these things. They are not structural. They just need help and resources and support and collaboration. And then some of the structural things are, more difficult answers and more difficult solutions, and need to be addressed, frankly, nationally, many of them, but like education reform. But I'll share another example of something Chip. This is something Chip and I did in December, and I think you actually witnessed it, Michelle. But we were asked to come talk about white privilege, and it was one of the biggest learnings that session, and just my reflection on it before that session, because I have literally been leading diversity and inclusion efforts at a few companies for 15 years. So I felt like I was pretty in tune with what needs to happen and what was going on. And I had never truly reflected on my kind of built-in, unearned benefit of the doubt called white privilege. I never thought about it. And so I studied it and I read books on it. And I really reflected on it. I was like, yeah, you got it. You've always had it, and you probably always will for the rest of your life. And it doesn't make me a bad person, and it doesn't mean that there aren't white people who suffer. But, once I had that awakening, if you will, then I realized, well, you can't have white privilege without black disadvantage, on the other side of that equation. And so once you recognize that, then you can be part of the solution. And I know, because I've talked to people in my personal life who maybe don't see it the way that I do. And again, they're not bad people. But to Chip's point, like, you got to really listen and truly reflect. And, the biggest problem this country has is everybody's digging their heels in on opposite sides of everything.
Right.
And we never meet in the middle of common ground. Right. And if people just stop digging their heels in, stop saying, I don't believe in white privilege, or I don't have white privilege, and just think about things from the other point of view, we will all be better off. And we will find the common ground that, the president referred to. And so that was, Chip, I don't know about you, but that session for me was a powerful thing.
Michelle, if you don't mind, I mean, I will tell you, like Tom, having been in many of the conversations with some of the business leaders, even like the hospital systems, whether it's Bay Health, Christiana Care, BB, they are looking at, population, right, and just the quality of healthcare and quality of health around the population. The discussions that are happening today are discussions I just have not seen in the past, and so that's why I'm really optimistic about the progress that will happen. It will happen over time. And Tom's point about white privilege, look, he and I both, we didn't have a lot to grow up in, and we thought, I could tell you, I thought I understood some things. And quite frankly, I've learned a lot that I did not know. Yes, my life was challenged, but it is not the same challenge as people like yourself have experienced, and it's understanding. And part of this journey was understanding it. Just think about it today. If you read the paper, the census, right, and the fact that Latinos, they're choosing other. I mean, that is a real example. Go back to the Jim Crow laws, right? Well, I don't like who's living here, so I'm going to change the law here. Well, guess who was in power at that point? Who was making the decisions? Go back to women's rights to vote, right? Go back. Women had the right to vote. It was taken away. Guess who took it away from them? People like me. Why? Maybe fear, right? Maybe fear of that. So those are just examples in some in our lifetime, some prior to that have just existed that I think we are wrestling with more today than we ever had through the work that you're doing and other organizations are doing to create greater awareness. And I think with that is what's really going to lead to be the catalyst of change. So we just got to keep at it. Got to keep at it.
I think we're trying to get people to understand that what the strategies you put in place to deal with institutional change, Tom, I think you've heard, is different, and system change is different than the strategies you put in place to deal with, with issues today, right? And, have you had, in conversations you've been in with your colleagues, do you think they get that from a funding perspective? I was talking to some colleagues earlier today, and we were saying that in most cases, funders can be, those that are providing the resources can be that create a barrier to not really understanding that, again, progress related to institutional change isn't linear, right? And that it doesn't happen overnight. While there has to be milestones against progress, a lot of times with funders, they want what we would call immediate results around things. But when we're dealing with inequities, for the most part, it's a much larger and longer haul game.
No doubt. Let me give you an example of something JPMorgan Chase is doing, and it was well documented. And I know our company's large and has financial resources that smaller companies, certainly local ones, don't have. But we have a program called the Path Forward, where we made a $30 billion commitment over 5 years to create a more inclusive world and more inclusive opportunities, and certainly more people benefiting from the economic recovery. And it's focused on a few things. And it's not just our company never has had a strategy of just writing checks. And we don't put money to work unless there is a plan, measures of success, and a strategy in advance of it. But we're very focused on affordable housing and home ownership for underserved communities, financial health and wealth creation. Several years ago, we funded a study here in Delaware on the racial wealth divide, which just proved what I think many of us already know. Access to banking and financial health. And so our branch on 9th and Market Street that we opened in the middle of COVID will very soon become a community center where we'll be able to do outreach into the city of Wilmington to help bring people that are unbanked into the institution, teach them financial health and education. So we're very focused on that. Chip mentioned it earlier, minority-owned businesses, entrepreneurs of color, minority depository institutions, providing capital access to them. And then, of course, our inclusive workforce and other philanthropy. So not all companies have those kind of financial resources, I get it, but all companies can do something. And all companies can put their name behind something locally, or they can provide the sweat equity resources that are needed to drive things if they don't have the capital to do it. So there's just so much that we can do together. And yes, bigger companies should do more, I believe. And but everybody can do something, and the more people we get on board, the better we'll be.
Yeah, I think Michelle, I think to that point, it just reminds me of Jim Collins and the genius of the and. As companies, yes, we need to generate a return for our shareholders, and we need to help address complex societal issues that we're all wrestling with. And, similar to Tom, for us, it's been about affordable housing. It is about healthcare and PPE and access to that, job skilling and upskilling of folks, and then small business in support of those things. And what's great in our job, working for global companies, what the global companies have afforded us to do, and we have billions of dollars committed to it, which is great. But the reality of it is not only globally, what we're able to do is take that to the local level and understand what the local needs are, and then push those dollars, push those resources, volunteerism, board memberships, all those things, just push all those to where the greatest need is in support of those themes. And that's what's exciting. And that's a responsibility that we have as a company here doing business here.
I'm going to turn to the Q&A because there's several in here and I don't think we're going to get to all of them, but I'm just going to start with the first one to see how far we get. So if one of you want to answer, if someone else has someone to add, jump in. It says, I've worked for Chase and Bank of America. I'm happy that we're working from home last year. As a Black woman, I've never felt comfortable with these conversations. What would you tell an employee that doesn't think things will get better in their office? They said the problem isn't the leaders, the problem is the employee sitting next to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, first thing I'd say is keep the faith and have hope that things will get better. I believe they will, and I know that's blind faith. I mean, they haven't gotten better over the last many hundred years. You said it's not the leaders, it's the people, and Chip mentioned this earlier, but it starts with the leaders. Like, the culture of a company is the worst behavior that you will tolerate. And leaders need to walk the talk, and they can't just stand up in front of a team or a company and say, I care about you, or an inclusive culture is important to us, and not demonstrate that every day. And so are there bad people in every company? Yes. And it's the leader's job to weed out the bad actors and inspire the non-actors, that 80-20 thing. There's too many people that I believe that the world is almost entirely filled with people who have good intentions, almost entirely. And we're at a point, and we're dealing with a subject where good intentions are simply kind of meaningless. Like, we need people to turn those intentions into actions. And so it really does start with leadership and what leaders will tolerate, and the culture they create. And I think back to, and what leader is that you're referring to, or that team that you're referring to in the question. I wonder what that conversation was like the day after George Floyd's murder. I wonder how real that felt. I wonder how open people were in that conversation and sharing their true feelings about it. Probably not very much. And it's because the leaders in that company tolerate that, or on that team tolerate that. So keep the faith. I think leadership plays a key role. Sorry, Chip.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I would just say, Michelle, I would encourage the young Black woman to use her voice, which is maybe it's a discussion with the manager. And if she's uncomfortable with the manager, or they've had that conversation, then I would say go up a level, because someplace, somewhere, it's going to connect. And I think then you take everything that Tom's talking about. Hopefully it's just one conversation. It's the conversation with your leader, and that happens. But I'm not naive to think that it may not require another conversation. But the most important thing is change will not happen unless change occurs. And you have an opportunity there, and I would encourage you to take advantage of it.
It says, since a majority of Delaware employers and employees work not in large corporations, but closely held business throughout the state, how can we leverage your resources and provide them with the tools so that they can start leaning in on the DE&I issues? So, saying how can more medium, small size businesses leverage your learnings and the research you have to help to lean in more?
I will tell you that I am happy to speak with anybody about it. chip.rossi@bofa.com. Send me a note, and I'm happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, ditto. And I know we've actually talked about that, Michelle. Corporations can help, but so can organizations like the United Way in terms of providing resources that small companies can use to, create training programs that big companies like Chip and mine have the luxury of being able to create and even, buy whatever. We have some really great training. A couple that come to mind are, one is called Journey to Inclusive Teams, and another one is You Belong Here. And they're all around inclusion and all around identifying unconscious bias. So we created them. And I get that smaller companies might not have the resources to do so. And so we've talked about internally, how do we make programs like that available to our small clients? And why not make it available to small companies in the community? So maybe that's something Chip and I can take away.
It's really a good thought. I think the other piece is if and I'm going to call him out, but if Mike Caranta's on the line at the chamber, okay, you just heard some feedback, which is important to 90% of your members. So that's a great opportunity to have some of those conversations. So it's good.
It says, as a leader, how do you bring everybody along and ensure people, specifically they put white males, don't feel left out in this equity journey?
Listen, I think from my perspective, and look, I'll just share this, which is, and this isn't going to be rocket science. It's probably very repetitive, but it's keeping the conversation going. I just keep thinking about the fact of where I was on this journey 15 months ago and recognizing the fact that people are just coming along on the journey. That's just the reality of it. And I just go back to the fact that time and time again, having that conversation, you connect with one other person, you get a note after the conversation that you had, whether it's externally, internally, whatever it might be, saying this was really meaningful. It really connected. I'm going to do X or Y. That's what happens. And you just got to keep at it from that standpoint. And look, I think from, a white male standpoint, you gotta realize that, whether you're thinking about roles in a company, look, the most talented people are going to go into roles. That's what you're going to do. However, you have to acknowledge the fact, and it starts with measuring it. What does your representation look like today? And the reality of it is if you're committed to representation that looks like the communities you serve, and you're honest with yourself, and you look at that across all levels, there's probably an opportunity to improve those things. And so I don't think people get left behind. I think it's just a matter of there's work to be done to ensure you have, representation that is reflective of the communities you serve.
Yeah. And, one of the most important points about that question is we're not going to make the change we've been talking about for the last hour without white males. I mean, let's face it, white males are in most of the leadership roles in this country, and they need to be the ones driving the change. You just have to. And so if there are, and yes, an inclusive culture makes everyone feel inclusive. We're not just talking about minorities. Maybe the white males that are worried that, we're not talking about them are the ones that need to step back. It's a bit like the white privilege conversation that Chip and I had. Maybe need to step back and think about, well, maybe things are different. Maybe I've never really felt like the only one in the room that looks like me. I had a Black woman who works for me. She's wonderful. And we just have these regular conversations. And she said, here's an example of what white privilege is. Do you think anybody's ever thought, Tom, that you got that job because of your color? Because I know people have thought that about me. This is a Black female. Mm-hmm. And so, the white males just need to, and I know it's not easy, but just need to be aware of that. Be aware of the privilege that they have, and try to understand, what it's like from the other side.
So one, I know both of you said, I think that this is a priority for you banks, but they said, can the bank reach out to Black businesses to help them with business development, putting a business plan together, learn about business interruption insurance, developing better supplier networks, and how can the bank basically help them to better achieve their goals?
Listen, I would tell you, and I think I can speak for Tom too. There's a lot of information online through our respective um, websites that you can access. That's one. If you want to learn a little bit there and have access to information. Two, we both have experts locally that can talk to you about those things. You just go into a financial center. We've got a small business banker that can talk about those things. Or three, if there's, I'd say True Access Capital is a great example locally that has a program focused on, small business entrepreneurs that does a lot of those things that I know both Chase and Bank of America have supported their efforts from that standpoint, from a community development financial institution standpoint. And the last thing I'd say is that feel comfortable. Again, I just say feel comfortable to shoot me a note, or reach out to me directly, and I can push you in the right direction and get you the right person. And I'm sure Tom could do the same thing. So
yeah, absolutely. Come into our community center on Ninth Market if you're a small business owner, and we'll help. And a big piece of the $30 billion path forward commitment that we make is geared towards small businesses, entrepreneurs of color, a similar fund to True Access or Entrepreneurs of Color Fund, a $200 million commitment to middle market sized businesses, and a $350 million commitment to minority owned small businesses. And so we're very focused on it. It's a very important part of all this. It's a very important part of closing the racial wealth divide.
Right.
Which I believe is the biggest problem we have facing in this country. Maybe you need look no further than the last year, and how this certain population got actually wealthier during the pandemic, and a certain population lost their jobs and struggled, and that divide grew. We've got to break the back of these things in order to close that divide, or things are not going to get better. And so that's why we're putting our financial resources to work the way that we are on things like we just described.
Right. We were also talking about, I was talking to Governor Jack Markell, I think just yesterday, and we were talking about Stand By Me in the 10 of the program. And, him and I were saying it's more too than just about helping individuals and businesses. As people of color, we're generally not taught, right, and myself included, about what, not just wealth creation, but, it's not about having good credit or just about having increase in my credit score, savings, reducing debt. Is really about how do we pass along a legacy of wealth, right? That tends not to happen, right? When you're thinking about real wealth. And so that's kind of, again, the culture, the long-term, the institutional change. The question was, if both of us, him and I, were sitting here 10 years from now, what would we want to see different to come out of this? And we've said we would actually hope that there would be a lot more of wealth creation and retention, meaning that we more people of color are both educated and have the resources to pass along to their next generation.
And the
listen. Oh, go ahead, Tom. Go ahead.
The number one way people do that, create wealth and pass it on, is through home ownership. Mm-hmm. The lion's share of our $30 billion commitment is geared towards that: affordable housing and home ownership in underserved communities, providing closing costs for people who don't have that money to settle on a home loan. So I couldn't agree with you more, but it starts with home ownership.
Right.
Yep, so.
Yeah, I agree with that. Home ownership. I mean, we have, for us, it's a grant program and down payment assistance. We had $5 billion. It's $15 billion just in home ownership in communities of color and underserved communities that we're committing to. But I also think it's jobs, and it's the upskilling, right, of folks. It's providing them with the right skills to help, because I do think that in order to break this cycle, Michelle, you got to start with well-paying jobs, right, for folks. And listen, whether you think we should have a minimum wage of $15 or not, people should be able to have a quality of life that they can support one another. And the reality of it is, I'm proud of what our company has done, going to $20 an hour, where people are, their job is $40,000 a year working at our company. I know not everybody can do that, but we need to do more to set people up so they can support their family and have the basic quality of life that they need, so they can actually expand and create wealth for folks. And part of that, quite frankly, is about capital. It's about capital look, I'll tell you right now, we're pushing millions of dollars into private equity companies supporting minority business owners locally in Delaware, we don't have any of them. And so, there are opportunities there that we got to look at to say, what are we doing to support, businesses and minority owners grow their business and create jobs and create wealth for themselves. So many different opportunities, Michelle.
This one says, Chip and Tom, thanks for the great insight, as always. Tom, is that you brought up the importance of employers having inclusion programs. We see a lot of organizations doing more diverse hiring, but not having good inclusion programs, thus putting diverse talent at risk of success. What steps can they take as employees and leaders to ensure inclusion programs are in place?
It's a little bit of the fear I have about inclusion programs or training programs around inclusion is people view those as a silver bullet to a problem, and it's not, and it never will be. And while they're highly effective, and I'm an advocate for well done inclusion training programs, they need to be reinforced constantly over time. And there are different ways you can do it. And I know Bank of America does the same thing through councils, line of business organizations that focus on inclusion, business resource groups like our Black professional group in Delaware, which is called BOLD. And, I've had Tony Allen come talk to that group. Randy Stone, a friend of mine from church, who's a business line president at DuPont. We happened to be talking at church one day. And he said, I'm the executive sponsor of the Black professional group at DuPont. I said, really? I am at Chase. Why don't we get our groups together? We got our groups together. Like, it's just Chip's early point. Like, all we need to do is connect dots in this small state of Delaware, and we can get things going. But I think business resource groups are an example. Training, but reinforced training is an important way to do it. Just because you're diverse doesn't mean you're inclusive. And so, back to the kind of the listening point and really doing an honest assessment of your culture. And the only way you'll do that, Chip, you mentioned the only way you do that is ask people and measure it and tell them what the measurements said.
Yeah, I think the other piece, Michelle, is inclusion, is really about what do you do every day to create an environment where somebody feels like they can just bring their whole self to work every day, that they don't have to leave or drop something off at the door. And these things have just really continued to hit me, like, drop it off at the door and come in and do what you need to do and then leave. And then you can actually exhale and get back to who you are as an individual. And I think that goes to different networks, whether it's LGBT, whether it's disabilities, where it's just a parental care network that people have challenges today with elderly care, and just talking about that. It's about providing safe spaces for people to have conversations about things that are important to them.
How do you measure the questions? There's a couple questions related to hiring practices and policies. I would kind of characterize them as part of the organizational culture. How do either of your organizations really measure your effectiveness of what you do? Like, how do you know you're hitting your intended target?
So, Tom, maybe I'll share one, and you probably have others. But look, we do an annual survey each year, and it's really, we go out to our employees across the globe, and we get that survey detail about how people are feeling. Do they feel like they can bring their whole self to work? How do they feel about sharing their views with us? How do they feel about, are they proud to work at our company, right? And we've got some things tied to diversity and around our company from that standpoint. And at the manager level, by the way, we get that feedback down to the manager level. Mm-hmm. So then you take that feedback and here, what do you do with it, right? That's the question, right? Which is, well, you got to start with getting the information and having that, and then putting together plans to work to improve and address it, knowing that we're coming back a year later and seeing, did we make any progress? So it's really about providing that opportunity. And look, I'll tell you, we get over 90% participation in our surveys. This is 200,000 plus people. So people wanting to share their views about how things are going. So Michelle, that's one of the ways that we're able to get it and then measure it. And then what I'd also say to you is that just think about just any metric you want to look. That's just the survey, but then think about just representation right back to that point. And it's the level of detail. We have a human capital report. You can go look at bankofamerica.com. You can look at our human capital report. It's going to talk to you about what the makeup of our board is, female, diversity, minority. It's going to go down our top three management levels in the company. But you have to measure that at all levels of the company, and then be honest with yourself and say, is it reflective? And is this where we should be, or could we do better?
We do exactly the same thing. You got to measure it, and you have to tell everybody in the company how you did.
Yep.
So we all have work to do, but I'm pleased to report we've made great progress on some of our highest scoring questions in the survey this year were around the inclusive culture and environment that we feel. And then take it once, and I have a diversity scorecard. I can go pull myself up and I can see exactly what the representation of my 12,000 person team looks like against my targets. And I have targets that stretch over numerous years. I know exactly how I'm doing. And some people don't like that. And, I say that's too bad. And, some people claim that they can't find talent. I also think that that's BS. We've got this wonderful HBCU 42 miles down the road from my office here.
Yeah.
And I think I heard that 350,000 graduates from HBCUs this year. And like the talent is there. But Chip, we take it one step further. You got to measure it. You got to measure how people feel. You got to measure what your representation looks like. You got to tell people how you're doing. And then we hold executives accountable.
Michelle, Tom and I, before we joined everybody this evening, right, we were talking about, I had my business review earlier today, and I think he had one as well. You know what the first topic of the agenda was? Let's take a look at what representation looks like. What's diversity and inclusion? What are you doing to cultivate the talent you have in your organization? And it starts at the top, and if that kind of cascades itself throughout the organization, it'll take hold.
Right. So I know we're coming up on our last question. It says, are groups like the Delaware Business Roundtable, which is made up primarily of the CEOs and from our local companies, are they having these conversations as well?
Absolutely. I could tell you, Janice Nevin, who's now leading the Delaware Business Roundtable, she put out her key priorities, and one of those priorities was around diversity and inclusion, and really getting more traction on that. So, listen, there's no question that that's happening from that standpoint. And the reality of it is that we're going to see progress. So, but Tom, I don't know if you want to share anything else.
Yeah, I mean, your experience on the roundtable and as the former chair of the board of the chamber are much greater than mine. But as a current board member, I can tell you that we are having those conversations as well. And there is no better form, in my opinion, to drive this kind of conversation through all the businesses, small, medium, large, in the state of Delaware than to use those groups that already exist for us. And the conversations are happening. And there are some leaders who are helping us along with those. And, I keep referring to Chip and my dear friend, Tony Allen, but, he's kind of helped push the needle on some of this stuff, but it's up to other people to take that forward and make sure that things happen. But yeah, it's happening.
And I think to Tom's point, Michelle, those people sitting around the state chamber table as well, the chair, go look at them. I can tell you that they represent tens of thousands of people that are employed across this state, and these conversations are happening. And you'll know the names of those leaders. So, there's momentum here. And I think that's what makes us feel optimistic about our future. Won't be easy, but we'll keep at it.
Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us this evening and having real conversations with us. I want to thank you for being transparent and authentic, because that's we're talking about being courageous. That's what we need to do in order to make progress. As you both noted, I think some harder conversations still need to be had. But we got to consider this as progress in the making. And I don't know, did either of you have any closing thoughts before we close out?
Well, it's progress in the making, but inertia will be to let it slow down and go on the back burner. And we all have to play our part in making sure that doesn't happen. And, Chip and I in leadership roles, and many leaders that are listening on this call, we have an obligation. If you have a platform to make positive change and you don't do it, then shame on you. And it's our responsibility to keep this going as leaders.
Yeah, I think that, we, there's a quote that comes to mind for me. And, one of the quotes is a Dr. Seuss quote, right? Which says, to the world, you may be a person, but to the person, you may be the world. And, all of us can make a difference. Just listen, open up your heart, and we can do more, and we need to do more. And I am enthusiastic about what's ahead of us. So, Michelle, I just say thank you on behalf of Tom and I. Thank you for having us. It was a real pleasure to be with you. And, I would just say to the group listening, just ask yourself, what can I do differently tomorrow to make an impact? And then go do it.
And I'll just say this, right? I think, Chip, when I've had a conversation with you right out of the gate after you had both of your organizations were already partners with Delaware Racial Justice Collaborative. Your colleagues are rolling up their sleeves and lending their muscle and their voice in order to drive meaningful change. But you said, right, that it really is going to take more leaders like yourself and Tom and other CEOs. I think you used the analogy, we can't have the work of DRJC and other organizations that's trying to eradicate systemic change and white leaders and CEOs sitting over here. Like, it really, Tom, you said it tonight, right? Like, it's not going to work without white males, right? It's not going to work without us working together and amplifying our voices and coming together. And we said, right, Delaware, we can do it in Delaware. We are the incubator. We're the right size. We can all get in the same room. And so I'm optimistic about the change. I know there's a lot of challenges that are before us, but we'll be leaning and counting on you and your organizations to help pave the way and be a part of this conversation so that we really can create one Delaware.
Keep the conversation going, Michelle.
We're just getting started.
All right. Yep. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.